questions without notice. And I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, as a great multicultural society, we all support a well-planned migration program. However, given we are in the middle of a housing and rental crisis, with worsening congestion and growing cost of living challenges, why is the Prime Minister adding another 1.5 million people from overseas over the next 5 years, including an extra 400,000 this year alone, and why was this hidden from the budget speech? Won't the Prime Minister's migration policy just make life harder for the growing number of working poor Australians?
Order. The Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting. Members on my right will be warned if they continue to interject during a question. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, they've had a further 24 hours to consider the magnificent budget brought down by the Treasurer.
Order.
And they've come up.
Order.
They've come up with the same first question as yesterday, when they asked just one question of me, and the Shadow Treasurer asked just one question of the Treasurer. Remarkable. And I note the Shadow Treasurer can't even get an MPI in budget week. It's just absolutely extraordinary.
Order.
But
the member for Gippsland.
I'm asked about migration, and yesterday I informed the House, unchallenged, that the numbers were going to be higher under them. The numbers were going to be higher under them. That's just a fact. And the Leader of the National Party, I'm going to quote my friend, the Leader of the National Party again here, because he had some advice for the Liberal Party leader about immigration and where policy was. He said this: "We'll be constructive with this government in saying that we welcome the changes that they're bringing forward. We believe permanent migration is important."
The Leader of the Nationals.
He went on to say this: "We've got to acknowledge some of the challenges that we left behind, like the fact that there were nearly 1 million unprocessed visas is a failure." You've got to put your hand up. You've got to be honest with people. He's going to be honest.
The Prime Minister will pause. Order. Far too much noise. I want to hear from the Leader of the Nationals.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The comment was about 1.5 million new immigrants. Right. There was no support of that whatsoever.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. The question was, the final part of the question, about government's migration policy making life harder. The Prime Minister is answering a broad question at the end of the question that was added to it. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much. You don't have to take instructions from the Liberal Party. Stand up for yourself. Stand up for yourself.
Order.
Back yourself in.
Order.
Have a bit of confidence.
Order. The member for Groom.
He said this: "We didn't get it right in the fact that the backlog was there, and I congratulate Andrew Giles for the work he has done on that in a pragmatic way, making sure we can move forward." But I don't have to go to the Leader of the National Party. I can go to the Leader of the Liberal Party, because this is what he said. This is what he said when we made an announcement in relation to the migration program. He said it's too little, too late. He wanted more and sooner. He said this decision to lift the migration cap should have been made 100 days ago when the government was elected. He said we do need an increase in migration numbers. These are all grand announcements. I want to see the rubber hit the road. It's clear that the migration number needs to be higher. That's what he had to say. That's what he had to say. And the Shadow Minister at the time, indeed, said this when asked about an increase in migration. Said she's now on the backbench. One of the three people that this leader has lost. Three Shadow Ministers since the last time Parliament
sat. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. The Minister for Infrastructure, members on my left and right will cease interjecting. I want to hear from the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Health. Why is it so important for the government to make it easier for Australians to see a bulk billed doctor, and what approaches has the government rejected, and what has the reaction been?
The call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We on Labor's side feel so lucky to have had such a talented young emergency physician with such energy join the Labor caucus. And I thank the member for Robertson for his question and for his ongoing advice about health matters. He, like all of us on this side, campaigned so hard at the last election on our promise to strengthen Medicare, and on Tuesday night the Treasurer's budget delivered on that promise. The Treasurer delivered a $6 billion package to strengthen Medicare, as well as a $1.5 billion boost to indexation across the board of Medicare rebates. This will deliver, Mr Speaker, the biggest increase to Medicare rebates across the board since Paul Keating was Prime Minister more than 30 years ago. In 1 year, a bigger increase to Medicare rebates than the former government managed in 7 long years. 1 year bigger than 7 long years under the former government. Our strengthening Medicare package, Mr Speaker, delivers more than $2 billion in deep reform recommended by the Strengthening Medicare Task Force, reform that will bring Medicare into the 21st century and into line with the needs of patients who tend to be older and tend to have more chronic disease. But the centrepiece of our strengthening Medicare package is a $3.5 billion investment to triple bulk billing incentives, described by the College of General Practitioners as a game changer for millions of mums and dads who want the confidence when their kids get sick that they can go to a bulk bill doctor. A game changer for millions of pensioners and concession card holders who rely on bulk billing, and, Mr Speaker, a game changer for general practitioners who now know they have a government in Canberra who values the work that they do. But it's not just the college, Mr Speaker, who has welcomed our package. The AMA described and said this targeted support is much needed and will make a real difference, especially in rural and regional areas. The Consumers Health Forum said this is a win for health consumers.
The Nationals.
We asked the government to listen to consumers, and, Mr Speaker, they said we have. I also noticed, though, Mr Speaker, some comments from a former health minister last night, now the Leader of the Opposition. He very usefully added his comments and said more needs to be done in the bulk billing space. Intriguing comments, because we know what happened when the Leader of the Opposition last ventured into the bulk billing space. When he last ventured into the bulk billing space, he tried to abolish bulk billing for every single patient and make sure that every man, woman, child, pensioner, concession card holder would pay a GP tax every single time they visited the doctor. Well, Mr Speaker, our position on Medicare has been unshakable for 40 years, and Tuesday's night budget delivered on that position.
The call to the honourable member for Wannon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. AMP Chief Economist Dr Shane Oliver has noted, quote, the resurgence in underlying demand on the back of very high immigration, and that 400,000 arrivals this year equates to demand for an extra 200,000 dwellings. If the AMP could see the link between very high immigration and housing shortage, why didn't the government?
You've got to be kidding.
Order. Members on my right. I'm issuing a general warning to members on my right. There is far too much noise. Questions must be heard in silence. If this continues, people will be removed immediately. I want to make it clear, when someone's asking a question, you don't interject. Give the call to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the member opposite for that important question. I mean, really, you come in here and you talk about migration when it was going to be higher under those opposite, Mr Speaker. It's going to be higher under those opposite. And indeed, Mr Speaker, they do very little about housing while they're in government, particularly when it comes to social and affordable housing, when they're now blocking the Housing Australia Future Fund bill in the Senate. The bill that would provide 30,000 additional social and affordable rental homes on top of all of the other things we're doing in our broadening housing agenda.
Order.
I would say
members
to the
on my left,
opposite,
the Manager of Opposition
Business. You come in
Business.
here and you say we're not doing enough when it comes to migration. The former Leader of the Opposition said we're doing too little too late. The numbers were going to be higher under you, and now you're actually trying to block the housing we're trying to provide. I mean, seriously, that is what you are doing.
Order.
You are absolutely trying to stop what we are doing when it comes to more housing.
Order. The Minister will pause. The member for Spence will cease interjecting. I'll hear from the member for Wannon.
This goes to relevance. It was about the link between immigration being high and your lack of housing supply. And I'd like the minister to go back to that point, please.
Order. I want to be able to hear the minister to make sure she's being relevant to the question regarding immigration and the pressures on housing. I'm going to ask her to return to the question.
Speaker, I mean, the Housing Australia Future Fund, we're talking about additional housing here in Australia. We're talking about 30,000 social and affordable rental homes that we want to get on the ground as soon as possible, that you are saying no to. You voted no in this House, you're saying no in the Senate to it. I mean, seriously, we've got
the Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. So will the member for
children fleeing family violence and older women at risk of homelessness.
Leader of the Opposition.
Some of that housing is for veterans who are at risk of homelessness, and you are saying no when we want to put more houses on the ground. After a decade of little action, we are trying to turn this around. We've invested $575 million immediately. We had the Housing Accord in our first budget. We've got a bill in the Senate that you're blocking.
The Leader of the Nationals.
More measures in the budget just 2 days ago for Build to Rent. Another additional $2 billion for Housing Australia to do more social and affordable housing. We continue to invest in housing. We've got homes on the ground today that you don't support, and we want to do more with the Housing Australia Future Fund. Instead, we've got you with the Greens forming this coalition of no homes. You don't want any homes on the ground when it comes to social and affordable housing. Seriously, you need to actually get your senators in the Senate to support this bill and allow us to bring on the debate and to have a vote. If you're serious about what's going on when it comes to housing, if you're serious about those Australians doing it tough, you would support the bill in the Senate.
And the House comes to order. I'd like to hear from the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How does the Albanese Labor government's second budget address the cost of living pressures facing Australian households rather than adding to them? Are there any barriers to the government's efforts?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank the wonderful member for Holt for her question about the cost of living. The centrepiece of the Albanese government's second budget is a package of responsible, targeted cost of living relief. And our budget was carefully calibrated and designed to take pressure off the cost of living rather than add to the inflationary pressures in our economy. 11.6 million Australians are eligible to benefit from the tripling of the bulk billing incentive. 6 million Australians to benefit from up to halving of medicine costs. More than 5 million households and 1 million small businesses to receive direct electricity bill relief, and millions more benefiting from our price caps. 1.1 million Australians to see an increase in payments like JobSeeker, Austudy and Youth Allowance, and many, many more Australians to benefit from initiatives like home energy upgrade loans, the expanded home guarantee scheme, additional TAFE places and the wages growth which we're seeing in our economy after a decade of deliberate wage suppression from those opposite. Now, Treasury forecasts our cost of living policies will directly lower price pressures and the CPI in 2023-24 and will not add to broader inflationary pressure in the economy. And that's because our support is carefully designed to provide effective and meaningful relief to households throughout the year, not in one big hit. And this is the sort of approach to targeting cost of living relief which is recommended by the key international organisations. And leading economists have supported the government's approach as well. Ben Jarman from JP Morgan says that this may also make the RBA's life a bit easier when it comes to interest rate decisions. Alan Oster says it's broadly neutral. Amy Oster says the budget balances investments in health, cost of living relief and aged care with the need to stimulate productivity without adding to our inflationary pressures. Stephen Halmarick says the contraction this year will be helpful in moderating inflation. It goes on and on and on, Mr Speaker. And market expectations for the path of interest rates has not changed as a result of the budget one bit. So this budget will make life easier for people while not adding to inflationary pressures in the economy. And, Mr Speaker, I say this to those opposite who are interjecting. If those opposite don't support a bit of cost of living relief for Australians, for millions of Australians, they should get up there and say so. The Leader of the Opposition tonight, if he doesn't support cost of living relief for Australians doing it tough, he should get up there tonight and say so.
Order. The member for Page. Before I call the next member, Ann Gippsland. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Danielle Snelling, the co-founder and Chief Executive Officer at Motherless Daughters Australia. Also in the gallery is the 2023 Indigenous Marathon Project Squad. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you and good luck in the New York City Marathon later this year. Give the call to the honourable member for Fowler.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. University students across the country will be forced to pay an additional 7% on top of the already exorbitant HECS debt. This will impact young people who are already struggling to study, work and pay rent while facing some of the worst economic challenges we have in a long time. Young people are our future and deserve a fair and equitable access to education. What will the government do to ease their debt pressure with your budget surplus?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much to the member for Fowler for her question about an really important topic. Obviously, the indexation of student loans has not been changed by this government. These are the usual arrangements that apply. But what has changed is the way that we are supporting students in the budget that we handed down on Tuesday night, supporting them with Austudy, supporting them with youth allowance, supporting them with Commonwealth rent assistance, all of the different ways that the budget proudly said to Australians who are doing it tough, including young people, including students, people who are genuinely under the pump. What we tried to do in the budget on Tuesday night is to say to all of those Australians who are doing it tough, to all the Australians who are under the pump, including young people, including students, is that we will do what we can to help you. We'll do that in a responsible and methodical way, which weighs up all of the pressures on the budget and in the economy. But this side of the House is proud to back in our young people, proud to back in our students. The way that we fund the education system and the way that we provide cost of living relief where we can is a really important demonstration of our support for young people and students.
Give the call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. The Albanese Labor government is making significant investments in women. How will the budget work to improve the lives of Australian women both now and into the future?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Macquarie for her question and for her advocacy on behalf of her electorate, and particularly her advocacy as a very strong voice for women as part of a caucus in government which is majority women for the first time. And I think it's no accident that you have a link between that and between the budget that we produced on Tuesday night, handed down by the Treasurer, with the Minister for Women's mark all over it, Senator Gallagher. In our first budget last October, we invested, of course, in cheaper childcare and in paid parental leave. Cheaper childcare was the largest on-budget commitment that we made in the election campaign, something that was in my first opposition leader reply to the budget, and in the era when opposition leaders actually had policies and put forward constructive ideas in budget replies. So in this budget, we have 15% rise also for aged care workers, a sector dominated by women workers and part of our national strategy for the care economy. And tomorrow I'll be talking with workers in the aged care sector along with the Minister, talking with them about the impact that this will have. It was a recommendation of the Royal Commission that we needed to address the underpayment of workers in this sector, by and large women, whether they be nurses, orderlies, the cleaners, the people who work in that sector, and $11.3 billion was a substantial commitment to do just that. We expanded the single parent payment, helping 52,000 single mums, increased rent assistance, and single women are around half of the recipients. We abolished the Parents Next program, which punished some of the most vulnerable women, and we provided additional support to people over 55 on JobSeeker, the majority of whom are women. We're working to close the gender pay gap, reforming workplace laws so it's easier to deliver pay rises for women in low-paid, undervalued sectors, requiring companies as well to report on their gender pay gap. We've made women's safety a national priority. Across 2 budgets, we've invested $2.29 billion to end domestic violence. And of course, our Housing Australia Future Fund, which remains held up in the Senate by the Coalition and the Greens political party, includes 4,000 new homes for women and children escaping domestic violence. We have a comprehensive plan for women because we want to be a government that represents all Australians.
Has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer.
Order. Order.
This morning, Westpac Chief Economist Bill Evans said this when speaking about Labor's budget with Karl Stefanovic. Karl, so interest rates will be higher for longer. Bill Evans, that is the risk. Will the Treasurer finally admit he is alone in saying that this budget will reduce inflation?
Order. The member for Deakin will cease interjecting. The member for Hume has asked his question. Order. The Treasurer has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. This guy is truly the gift that keeps giving, isn't he? Mr Speaker, if the Shadow Treasurer had watched the whole conversation between Bill Evans and Karl Stefanovic, Karl asks Bill Evans, have you changed your expectations for interest rates? And he says no. I mean, seriously.
Order.
I mean, help the guy out. Will you help the guy out? Somebody point out to him that when Karl Stefanovic asked Bill Evans, have you changed your expectations of interest rates into the future, he said, no, I haven't changed them. I haven't changed them, which is the point that I've been making from ever since the budget was handed down, Mr Speaker. Now, the other thing that the Shadow Treasurer says, it's hard to keep a straight face with this bloke, Mr Speaker. The other thing that the Shadow Treasurer said, I just read out all of these economists who say that the impact on the budget when it comes to inflation is either a good one or broadly neutral. He tries to pretend that we are on our own. And I'm happy to read them out again for you. JP Morgan says it may also make the RBA's life a bit easier. Alan Oster says it's expected to be broadly neutral over coming years. Amy Oster, the budget balances investments in health, cost of living relief and aged care with the need to stimulate productivity without adding to our inflationary pressures. Stephen Halmarick, the move to surplus in 2022-23 represents a fiscal contraction for this year that will be helpful in moderating the inflation pulse. The market hasn't moved since Tuesday night when it comes to inflation and it comes to interest rate expectations, Mr Speaker. And most importantly, and this is something I didn't get the opportunity to mention in the answer before, and so I'm pleased that he's very charitably given me the opportunity to say so now, Mr Speaker. Now, in the strange world that the Shadow Treasurer occupies, right, the budget on Tuesday night that has a net spend over 4 years of $20 billion is inflationary. But the last budget that they handed down, budget they handed down in March 22, had a net spend of $39 billion. So they had a net spend which was twice as big as the one on Tuesday night. Now, in their world, $39 billion is not inflationary, as we're heading towards the peak in inflation, but $20 billion on the other side of the peak in inflation is somehow inflationary. This, old son, is why nobody takes you seriously.
Order. Order. No, order. Members on my right. Members on my right. The I'll hear from the manager, but I think the Treasurer is going to beat you to the punch there.
Well, Mr Speaker, there are standing orders against offensive words and reflections on members.
Order. Order. Order.
And
members on my right will cease interjecting immediately or be warned.
The Treasurer is a serial offender in showing a gross lack of respect.
All right, resume.
He ought to withdraw.
Resume your seat. Order. To assist the House, I'm giving the call to the Treasurer. I'm going to ask him to withdraw.
Withdraw, Mr Speaker.
The member for McEwen will cease interjecting, as will the member for Cunningham. Give the call to the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the most excellent Minister for Social Services.
Order. No. Resume your seat.
Okay.
We've had this before. Questions are asked to ministers directly without any extras. Give the call to the member for Solomon.
No. Yes, understood, Speaker. Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting people that need it most through the budget as part of its $14.6 billion cost of living package?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Solomon for that question, but also for the great work he does as representing the families of Darwin and Palmerston, and really appreciate his advocacy. The government, of course, understands that many Australians are doing it tough right now. They are feeling the pinch, and that's why we have delivered a responsible budget that carefully calibrates a balance of competing pressures. Of course, it does strike the right balance. We are providing substantial cost of living relief that also provides targeted support to people on the lowest incomes without adding to inflation, as well as helping with power bills and a record investment in the bulk billing incentive, of course, cheaper medicines. Our $14.6 billion cost of living plan also includes responsible and targeted help for people doing it tough. We are strengthening the social safety net which many Australians rely on. The increases to job seeker, youth allowance, ab-study and other eligible working payments will support those who rely on the safety net. Of course, we're giving extra support for older job seekers over 55 that takes the pressure off them as they face additional barriers to finding work. And we've provided the biggest increase to Commonwealth rent assistance in 30 years. We're recognising the work that single-parent households do by expanding eligibility to the single-parent payment. Now, of course, our package of measures has been described as life-changing by the Brotherhood of St Lawrence and taking steps to a fairer Australia by St Vincent de Paul. The ACTU has said these additional payments will be welcome relief to many parents, women and children doing it tough. And of course, the National Australia Bank's Ross McEwen said we welcome government action to lessen rising cost of living impacts on the most vulnerable Australians. It's a challenging balancing act to provide financial support without fuelling the inflation you're trying to reduce, which is why targeted measures are critical. Now, while the country comes together and welcomes this Labor government's budget, there is an important question for those opposite. Will the Leader of the Opposition stand up tonight and support our cost of living relief? Of course, we know that those opposite stood in the way of energy relief for households right across the country. But the test tonight will be, will this Leader of the Opposition endorse our cost of living package that's targeted, that's well calibrated and will be welcomed by so many? What the Australian people want to hear tonight is yes from this Leader of the Opposition, not the constant no.
Give the call to the Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. Economists from Deloitte, Access Economics, UBS, S&P Global Ratings, BetaShares and EY have all warned that Labor's high-taxing, big spending budget will raise inflation, risking further interest rate rises. This morning the minister said, and I quote, "This is a budget that will put downward pressure on inflation." Can the minister explain how the budget will put downward pressure on inflation?
Order. Give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
For the question. Not in my portfolio, but happy to expand on what I discussed this morning, which was I was asked, how is this a budget that assists middle Australians? And I said, this is a budget for middle Australians because middle Australians are facing energy bills, middle Australians have children, middle Australians need to pay for medicines, and middle Australians like to go to the doctor, preferably a bulk billing doctor near where they live. And this is a cost of living budget with a $14.6 billion package designed to decrease the price of childcare. I've had three kids in childcare at the one time.
The minister will pause. The question was about how the budget puts downward pressure on inflation. The minister is answering that regarding examples and also government policy. So I will hear from the Deputy Leader, but I hope she was listening to what the minister was saying, otherwise I'll sit her down as well.
Indeed I was, Mr Speaker, and my point of order is on relevance because it was a tight question and it specifically went to the minister's own quote that the budget would put downward pressure on inflation. And my question,
resume
how?
your seat. Yeah. I do want to hear from them. Order. I want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, just to the point of order, the question does not relate to the minister's portfolio. The minister has taken it anyway. The minister, in answering the question, has been absolutely relevant to every aspect, and the only objection from the Shadow Minister is that her question is being answered and she doesn't like the facts that are coming out.
Order. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition. Order. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, it was suggested that it's not in the minister's portfolio. It deals with the budget. The minister has responsibility for a portfolio which involves budgetary expenditure.
Yeah. Look, order. Just going to keep order. Just going to keep things moving. The question was about comments the minister made about the budget regarding inflation. She's giving examples about in her portfolio and broader government context. She can't be really more relevant than she is already being. So I'm just going to ask the minister to return to the question. I'm going to listen carefully to make sure she's reflecting what the member asked. And give her the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was saying that I have 3 kids that are in childcare and that come 1 July, our decision to reduce the cost of childcare for people makes a huge difference to cost of living. And we have made decisions to put downward pressure on the price of childcare, downward pressure on the price of electricity bills, rather than the cash splash bonanza that you lot tried to do when you had the levers of power. We are making decisions to give subsidies to people and to give subsidies on things like energy bills, subsidies on things like childcare bills, because that puts downward pressure on inflation. We are also giving a pay rise to aged care workers to the value of $11.3 billion. That's an extra $140 a week for personal carers or $200 a week for registered nurses. Giving pay rises to people assists with their cost of living. That's a $14.6 billion package that I was talking about in my comments on Today this morning. This is a budget for Middle Australia. That was the question that I was asked this morning. And people who represent Middle Australia in the suburbs of Brisbane have said to me since Tuesday night that they're grateful that they've got a government who's prepared to get the balance right between responsible decisions in spending and responsible decisions in saving. And I'm grateful for the fact that we have managed to find $36 billion in funding for aged care, an industry that has been neglected for 9 long years. Aged care workers being some of the most vulnerable workers in this country who suffer the cost of living first when inflation goes up, and inflation being a tax on the poor, and the poor being the kind of people who are in our care economy and who do the best thing by our care economy and who need their budgets to serve them best, which is why we are making a cost of living package which does things like cheaper medicines, which does things like Commonwealth rest assistance, which does things like tripling the bulk billing rates for people so it's affordable for them to go and take their kids to see a doctor, all of which are downward inflationary pressure measures.
Order. The minister's time has concluded. When the House comes to it, I'll hear from the member for Macnamara.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
How is the Albanese Labor government acting to help families and businesses with the cost of energy bills? And what approaches has the government rejected?
The call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Order. The Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for the question. And as the member knows and the House knows, the budget contained a range of measures to help Australian households and businesses deal with energy prices, Mr Speaker. We delivered the Household Savings Plan, which provides real support to families and to businesses who want to reduce their emissions and their bills by investing in energy efficiency and renewable energy. And of course, the budget also delivered on the energy relief package that we announced last year and that was negotiated by the Treasurer and his state and territory colleagues. And we now have very real evidence, Treasury analysis, of the impact of the government's intervention last year and in the budget. And those honourable members opposite will be very interested to hear. They are apparently interested in measures which reduce household costs, so they want to know what's being done to reduce household costs and inflation. And I'm very happy to inform the House that the impact of the government's interventions, both the coal and the gas cap and the rebates to affected families, have meant, for example, in New South Wales, where families were facing a 40% increase in power prices before the government's intervention. For those who are receiving the rebates, now will receive a 7% decrease in their energy bills, Mr Speaker. In Victoria, the difference is $481. $481 for families across Victoria. In Queensland, honourable members from Queensland opposite will be very interested to hear. They were facing, Mr Speaker, a matter of interest to you, I know, Mr Speaker, a 43% increase, now a 10% decrease, now a 10% cut in their energy bills after the intervention. South Australia was facing a 51% increase in their power bills. Due to the Albanese government's intervention, it's now a 5% cut in their energy bills, Mr Speaker, for those who are receiving the rebates. Tasmania was facing a 29% increase, now a 10% decrease. ACT, 100% renewables, a little bit different, a 3.5% increase, now a 15% decrease, Mr Speaker. So those members opposite who voted against the intervention voted for higher power prices. Now I'm asked what policies we rejected. We've rejected doing nothing, which is the opposition's approach. We've rejected inserting the most expensive form of energy, nuclear, but we look forward to tonight, Mr Speaker, where we'll hear more plans. Perhaps we'll get the costings. Perhaps we'll get the costings of the small modular nuclear reactors. Perhaps we might get the locations, because leaders of the opposition love budget replies. Their chance to shine before the country, to lay out their policies, to lay out the modelling, to lay out the analysis, to lay out the details.
The member for
I look forward to the Leader of the Opposition doing that with energy tonight, to outline his plans for Australians. We've delivered. They've got nothing.
The member for Fairfax is continually interjecting. I can hear every word that he is saying, trust me. He is warned. The member for Groom is warned, and just reminding the member for Barker is warned. And I give the call to the honourable member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Corey and Sarah are a hard-working couple with a mortgage who are from Western Australia. They told the Today Show, "What this budget has said to all Australians, I believe, is that the government hasn't listened to any of us. Why has this government brought down a budget which risks middle-class Australians becoming the new working poor?"
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Durack for her question. Now, as a direct result of the budget, a budget calibrated to support our economy, to support businesses, to support small business, to support people who are doing it really tough, such as single mums, people on job seeker, but also with a range of measures designed to help people in Middle Australia. I refer to the answer, the fine answer of the member for Lilley, speaking about her personal experience with childcare. Don't people in Middle Australia use childcare? We're going to decrease the costs of childcare.
Order.
But as a direct result as a direct result of this government's budget, 5 million Australians will pay less on their power bills. 5 million Australians will receive bills that are less as a direct result of the energy price relief plan that passed this parliament, with those opposite all voting against it. All voting against something that will contribute, between us and the states and territories, $3 billion to lower those power bills. Those opposite voted against it, and this week they've been out there saying, oh, we were for it the whole way. We were always for it. We were always with you. We just didn't vote for it. We just didn't vote for it. More than 1 million families paying less for childcare. 11 million Australians paying less to see a doctor. 11 million Australians. And we know that if the Leader of the Opposition had have had his way, nobody would have been able to be bulk billed, because he proposed its abolition by having a fee on everyone who visited a doctor. Everyone. In the first 4 months of this year, Australians paid $76 million less for their prescriptions because of our cheaper medicines plan. And because of this budget, 6 million Australians will pay less for their medicines. Now, tonight I look forward to finding out if they're in favour of those 6 million Australians paying less for their medicines or not. As a result of our budget now, the two budgets, 480,000 Australians will pay zero for their TAFE courses. Because of us, 250,000 aged care workers will get paid more. Because of our submissions, the Fair Work Commission has agreed also those on the minimum wage will get paid more. Under our government, we're looking after people wherever they live, whatever their income, whoever they are.
Concluded. Give the call to the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How does the budget clean up the mess left in defence and deliver the priorities outlined in the Defence Strategic Review? What has been the response?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question and acknowledge his service in the Australian Defence Force. Tuesday night's budget laid down a careful, sober, clear plan by which the government would fund the implementation of the AUKUS agreement and the government's response to the Defence Strategic Review. And we've done this by increasing the defence budget over the medium term above the trajectory that we inherited from those opposite, but also by making really difficult decisions to reprioritise areas within defence from, frankly, areas which were less important to other areas where resources were needed the most. Now, when the government laid down the Defence Strategic Review, the Shadow Minister for Defence accused us of cannibalising defence to pay for our priorities. But on Sunday, the Shadow Treasurer made clear that it is the position of the coalition that defence spending should stay within the budget envelope which those established. So if you are not going to reprioritise defence spending on the one hand and you're not going to increase defence spending on the other, then the only way those two statements add up is if the Leader of the Opposition has the honesty tonight in his budget reply to make clear that a coalition government would not be funding the AUKUS agreement, that a coalition government would not be funding a new long-range strike capability for this country, that a coalition government would not be resourcing our Defence Force personnel, which this country so badly needs, because they cannot have it both ways. But don't expect any outbreak of honesty on that kind tonight, because we saw the way those operated opposite when they were the government, when their guiding philosophy in defence policy was smoke and mirrors. $42 billion worth of announcements without a cent behind them. which meant that a full quarter of what Defence was expected to purchase there was not a dollar for. They never made a difficult decision. They never engaged in serious defence policy. In fact, the only decisions they ever made was what music they were going to use on the videos they produced, which used Defence Force personnel and asked people to donate to the Liberal Party, because that is what defence actually means to them. Australia faces the most serious circumstances that we've had since the end of the Second World War. We need serious people making serious decisions, and the only party in this country right now doing that is Labor.
Before I call the member Griffith, I'd like to advise in the gallery today is the former Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, the Honourable Adam Giles. And I give the call to the honourable member for Griffith.
Thanks, Speaker. Question to the Treasurer. Angus Shepherd completed his PhD last year with a HECS debt of $48,000. He was set to pay back around $1,500 of his debt in his next tax return, but with Labor's indexation, his debt will rise by about $2,700. He will end up about $1,000 further in the red. Can the Treasurer justify why Labor thinks it is good to push students further into debt and raise more increasing HECS debt than from changes to the tax on gas corporations?
Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, it's characteristically dishonest of the member to pretend that there's been some change in the budget on Tuesday night.
Order. The Treasurer will pause. I'd like to hear from the Leader of the Australian. Order. Whoever's constantly laughing on my right, if it continues, highly disorderly, and you'll be asked to leave without warning. I want to hear from the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Mr Speaker, that is a very clear reflection on a member, and the Treasurer should withdraw.
The Minister for Home Affairs is getting very close to being removed from the chamber. I'm just going to ask the Treasurer to withdraw and continue with his answer.
Withdraw, Mr Speaker.
Order.
I say to the member for Griffith that he should not come into this place and pretend that Tuesday's budget had any changes to the repayment arrangements around HECS debts. At least ask all the questions you want, important questions about the cost of living for students and young people. But don't come in here and pretend you're voting with them. You're voting with them. You're voting with them in the Senate. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition interjects about arrangements between major parties and the Greens. That's not the best day to do it, did I say to the Leader of the Opposition. Today is not the best day to point that out, the Leader of the Opposition.
Order.
Those opposite are engaged in an unholy alliance with the Greens to knock off social and affordable housing in the Senate. And so to bring up in this typically ham-fisted way a relationship between a major party and the Greens, today's not the day to do it, my friend. Today's not the day to do it. Now, Mr Speaker.
The Treasurer will pause. The member for Dunkley will leave the chamber. The member for Swan then will withdraw from the chamber. The member Dunkley may stay. I misheard, but the member for Swan will leave the chamber. Somebody's leaving. Order. There is far too much noise in the chamber. I know everyone is very exercised. I need to be able to hear what the minister is answering the question. I'm going to give a call to the member for Griffith.
Speaker, on relevance, the question was specifically about indexing student debt and why the government justifies it.
I give the call to the Treasurer to ask him to return to the question.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and to the member. The point that I'm making, Mr Speaker, is that the member for Griffith shouldn't come in here and pretend there's been a policy change in the budget when it comes to the repayment of HECS debt. There hasn't. This is the long-standing arrangement that is applied to the indexation of student debt. And his time would be better spent in this place not making up stories about Tuesday night's budget and voting for a social and affordable housing instead. This is a member who wanders around his electorate pretending he's for social and affordable housing and then comes down here and votes against it. And so when it comes to students, Mr Speaker, when it comes to students and young people, Mr Speaker, I answered this question when the honourable member for Fowler asked it. What this government is doing is backing in students and young people with an increase in Commonwealth rent assistance, with an increase in Austudy and youth allowance and the base rate of JobSeeker. And these are important ways that we demonstrate our support for students and young people, like I told the member for Fowler. Now, I understand that the member for Griffith will get all over his social media feed and pretend that Labor has made some kind of change when it comes to the repayment of HECS debts, but we haven't.
Give a call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. What approaches has the Albanese Labor government changed in order to better deliver for regional Australians?
Give a call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member for her question. A proud regional woman delivering in her regional electorate. Like everyone on this side of the House, are incredibly proud of this budget on Tuesday night, which delivers for regional Australians. And it's great to see the government recognises regional Australia for what it is. It's resilient, it's diverse and it's innovative. And you will see on this side of the House it's much more than the electorate you live in. We know that regional Australians are the economic drivers of our nation. We've delivered more for regional Australia in 1 year than those opposite did in 10.
Order. Members
because
on my
those
left.
opposite loved to release a press release. They loved the 30-second media grab, but they actually forgot the bit about delivering. Because you cannot win votes and you cannot deliver for regional Australia. You cannot build a bridge with a press release. You can't do a new playground with a 30-second media grab. You've actually got to put the hard work in. Just so you know, a shovel helps you get there, or even sometimes a calculator. Because what you did was add 800 projects to the infrastructure pipeline but forgot to add the extra money. You can't half-deliver a project to people, you actually have to do it. And the funny thing is regional Australians awake to you guys. They are sick and tired of having to wait all the time. It's all these announcements, all these media grabs. We'll do the Rocky Ring Road, but it was actually Labor that funded the business case, and it'll be Labor that delivers the project. On this side of the House, regional Australia is much more than a grants program. Much more. It's health, it's housing, it's skills, it's infrastructure, and we're delivering for everyone. You should know how hard it is to see a GP in regional Australia, and you had 10 years and didn't do anything about it. On this side of the House, we're tripling the bulk billing incentive and we're waiving HECS debts for healthcare workers. That's how you get people to come and work in the bush. We've taken action by expanding the regional first home buyers guarantee, and we're incentivising build-to-rent properties because in our communities that's what they're after. We're investing in our people through fee TAFE places. We're focused on helping our regions grow with a $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund and the $2 billion Hydrogen Head Start Fund. And we've listened to regional Australia because what they've asked for is help for mitigation and resilience in natural disasters. You did nothing, and we'll deliver $200 million every year in the Disaster Ready Fund. And just like the Bushfire Royal Commission asked for, we'll deliver a national messaging system to protect people and property. You had a chance, you did nothing. And after the BBRF debacle, we'll make sure...
Just before I call the member for Page, I want to interrupt the minister during her answer, but can I remind all ministers, when answering questions standing Order 65, it is highly disorderly to use the term you. Please direct all remarks through the chair. Give the call to the honourable member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. In April 2022, you told the Australian public there would be no tax increases under a Labor government. Why have you broken this promise by increasing taxes on the Australian and international tourists?
Just resume your seat for a moment, member for Page. I'm going to give the call. I normally would do this, but You have to listen to what I'm saying. I'll give the call to the Leader of the House.
Something like 23 seconds ago, Mr Speaker, you gave a ruling asking us to only use the term you when we were referring to you as Speaker. Immediately following, it's not being met, and it was given as a direction to ministers, but obviously it applies to the whole House, and I thought I should draw it to your attention.
We're just going to reset and take two, and I'll give the call to the member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. So my question is to the Treasurer. In April 2022, the then Shadow Treasurer told the Australian public there would be no tax increases under a Labor government. Why has the Treasurer broken this promise by increasing taxes on Australian and international tourists by raising the passenger movement charge when we have the most globally competitive tourism market we have ever seen? Why do Australians always pay more under Labor?
Order. I'll give the call to the Treasurer. Order. The Minister for Infrastructure, the Shadow Treasurer, cease objecting.
You're against it.
The Minister for the Environment.
Now they want more people. More people or less?
The Assistant Treasurer. If anyone interjects, they will be removed from the chamber. I need to hear the Treasurer.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. There's a pattern emerging here. Early in the pack, the Shadow Treasurer gets a question. It doesn't go so well, so they give it to someone else. And now we're on to Plan B. So I thank Plan B for his question. Now, Mr Speaker.
Order. Order. The member for Groom will leave the chamber. You've been warned. You've had a good go. Going to call the member for Page on a point of order.
Yes, Speaker, the point of order is hubris. And if it's not a technical point of order,
resume your seat. Resume your seat. Just going to ask the Treasurer to continue with his answer. Treasurer has the floor.
Mr Speaker, the change in the budget that the honourable member is referring to is a change to the passenger movement charge, which hasn't been indexed since, I think, 2017. And governments from time to time index the passenger movement charge, and the difference in the budget measure is that the payment that you make to leave Australia has gone from $60 to $70, a $10 increase, which reflects the indexation since 2017, which seems to me to be a responsible way to go about it. Now, tourism is obviously a central part of our economy. It is one of the reasons, it is one of the strengths in our economy is our tourism sector, and you can see why people want to come here.
Order.
And our advice is that a $10 increase to the passenger movement charge from $60 to $70, which reflects the indexation since 2017, will have no impact on the amount of tourists coming here. Now, Mr Speaker, those opposite have to decide. Do they want more tourists coming here, or do they want fewer tourists coming here? One of the reasons why the net overseas migration number is a bit higher is because more long-time tourists are coming to Australia. So the first question that gets asked suggests that there are too many tourists coming to Australia. The first one, too many tourists coming to Australia. The most recent question is that there aren't enough tourists coming to Australia. They have to make their mind up. Now, Mr Speaker, tonight the opposition leader gets an opportunity to clean up all of this rubbish. One shadow minister saying one thing, another shadow minister saying another thing. It's his opportunity to get up and say, does he support cost of living relief for people or not? He can do that from the dispatch box at 7:30.
Call to the honourable member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Youth. How will the Albanese Labor government's budget support young Australians by providing targeted cost of living relief?
Good question. Give the call to the Minister for Youth and Early Childhood Education.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Bennelong for his question and just take a moment to acknowledge the fine work that he is doing in representing and the interest that he has in the wellbeing and welfare of young people and children in Bennelong. I think it's fair to say that all of us on this side know that young people are doing it tough. And the budget that the Treasurer delivered on Tuesday night, a proudly Labor budget, builds a strong foundation for a better future. It invests in young people right through, from early childhood right through to their adult working lives. The budget delivers powerful, impactful and targeted relief to some of the most vulnerable young Australians. Those young people on income support payments, whether it be AusStudy or Youth Allowance or JobSeeker, who will get an increase to those payments. Or those young people who are renting, who will benefit from the largest increase in the Commonwealth Rent Assistance in 30 years. For those struggling to pay their power bills, we're providing responsible and meaningful energy bill relief in partnership with state and territory governments. Our budget also means that young Australians with stable or ongoing health conditions, including mental health conditions, will now only need to visit the GP and a pharmacist half as many times for a repeat script for over 300 medicines on the PBS, halving the cost of essential medicines for those young Australians. We're tripling the bulk billing incentive. That will benefit 11 million Australians right across Australia, and that will include young Australians by helping them to gain access to the medical care that they need. We've already delivered cheaper medicines for Australians, and we're also supporting young Australians in different ways. We've supported young Australians to earn a better wage through our IR reforms that were passed last year. We're increasing access to education and training, fee-free TAFE and university places. We're looking after their mental health and well-being. For a young person who turns 20 this year, for almost half of their life, almost a decade under those previous, young people were forgotten, at best ignored. And as a result, Mr Speaker, many young people lost faith in the institution of government. The Albanese Labor government wants to change that. And we will continue to invest in young Australians. We will continue to listen to young Australians, because we know that when young people thrive, so does Australia.
Give the call to the honourable member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. In the government's recently released National Electric Vehicle Strategy, the government committed to working in consultation with stakeholders to design a fuel efficiency standard for passenger and light commercial vehicles, yet there was no timeline was given. Exactly when can Australians expect to see these standards being announced?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question and her interest in the National Electric Vehicle Strategy released by the Minister for Transport and I in recent weeks. And the honourable member is right. That National Electric Vehicle Strategy commits the government to introducing a fuel efficiency standard, and we're very proud of that. This should have happened years ago. It was always contemplated by some opposite. The former member for Kooyong said he was committed to it. They just never got around to doing it. They never got around to doing it because they don't actually believe in making manufacturers send fuel-efficient vehicles to Australia, electric vehicles and other vehicles to Australia. So we have committed to doing that because Australia and Russia are the only two developed countries without fuel efficiency standards, and that means Australians are missing out on real choice. Now, this is a complicated— they're missing out on real— here they go again. Every time they interject against renewable energy and electric cars, they just remind the Australian people they still don't get it. Keep it coming. Keep those interjections, the denial and delay, they should just keep it coming. Now, in relation to fuel efficiency standards, they are a complicated piece of work. The Minister for Transport and I released a consultation paper. We received many submissions calling for fuel efficiency standards. I will be frank with the honourable member, not many of those submissions went to the detail about how they should be designed. Hardly any. The Minister for Transport and I read them all. Many call for fuel efficiency standards, but only one or two actually went to detailed elements of design, and we have to get that right. Now, what we have done is open now consultation for 6 weeks on the detailed design. 6 weeks on the detailed design. Having waited 10 years, 6 weeks to get it right, to get the detail right. That's what the Minister for Transport and I are doing. That consultation period is well and truly open. We invite all submissions, including from members of the House and the Senate, and I know peak groups are looking at their submissions. The Minister for Transport will be looking at that very carefully, as I will be, because we want to get it right. We've said we want ambitious standards, but we want standards that are realistic We want standards that are achievable, and that's what we are committed to delivering, because Australia had 10 years of delay and now we are getting on with it.
The call to the honourable member for Patterson.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking through its responsible and practical budget to reduce cost of living pressures and help give Australians the skills and training they need to harness the jobs and opportunities of the future? And what's been the response to the government's plans?
The call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, can I thank Speaker? Can I thank the member for Patterson for her question? I recently was with her in her electorate, visiting BAE Systems in Williamtown, meeting apprentices who are training to work on the F-35 program, so critical for our national security. Speaker, Tuesday's night responsible and practical budget continues our work to rebuild and modernise our skill sector, to give more Australians the opportunity to access well-paid, secure employment, now and of course into the future, and give businesses the skilled workers that they are absolutely crying out for. The skilled measures include a $3.7 billion investment upon striking agreement with the states and territory governments to ensure that we continue to increase places in the vet sector, and with TAFE at its centre, $54 million to improve the completion rates of apprentices, something we really have to attend to, and investing over $400 million on foundation skills. 1 in 5 adults have real problems with literacy and numeracy, and we really need to attend to that very significant matter. And of course, on top of that, as the Prime Minister said, we have an additional 300,000 fee-free TAFE and vet places that will be delivered as well from 2024. That's on top of the 180,000 for this year. Now, Speaker, the fee-free TAFE has already been delivering effective and targeted cost of living relief for students. And I'm asked what the response has been to this government's plan. Well, according to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, fee-free TAFE is wasteful spending. That is the view of the opposition, wasteful spending. Now, I'm hoping that the opposition may change its mind on that. And given the fact that the Deputy Leader managed to speak in favour of the JSA bill but vote against it, maybe they'll flip on this as well. Maybe they'll flip on this as well. But I would not hold my breath. But of course, the Leader of the Opposition has a chance tonight. He can stand up tonight and say whether he supports students and dealing with cost of living pressures that they are enduring, or whether he supports fee-free TAFE for hundreds and thousands of students, or whether in fact he continues his position to oppose support for students that are really struggling to make ends meet. Well, that's the opportunity he has, because if he chooses not to support this measure by the government, then what it would mean under a Liberal government for students in New South Wales training in manufacturing technology, they would be $5,750 worse off. For those undertaking an early childhood education care diploma in Victoria, they would be $8,700 worse off. For students in South Australia training in building construction, they would have to pay $10,600 more if this Leader of the Opposition was ever on this side of this House. Speaker, the Opposition have shown a failure to support government measures, including those that support students.
Time has concluded. Give a call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In 2019, the Prime Minister said population growth driven by migration was causing strain on our big cities and was a wake-up call to fast-track spending on major road and rail projects. But in this year's budget, there is no new spending on major infrastructure projects in our capital cities. If the Prime Minister thought this was an issue in 2019, why has he done nothing about it now he's in power? And there are an extra 1.5 million people who will come to Australia over 5 years?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I thank whoever suggested that they give me a question on infrastructure. I thank them very much, whoever the member of the Tactics Committee was who put that forward. We've already said, of course, on the issue of migration, 2019, they were in government, and their projections, of course, when they were in government, were for higher migration than we have today. Higher numbers. That is the fact. That is the fact. That is the fact. So one of the things that's happened, and I'll go through it. I'll go through one example really clearly, so that somehow they get this. When you used to have students arrive to Australia who produce an income, and they count as part of the NOM. Students were coming, and first year come, and other people finish their degree, they go. What happened? There was a pandemic, and people didn't come, so they weren't there to go. What's happened now is the economy has opened up, and students are coming to start their degrees, but they're not leaving because they haven't finished their degrees. It is not hard. And when it...
Order. Prime Minister will just pause for a moment. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Minister for Veterans Affairs. The Manager of Opposition on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question is not about the people who are coming. The question is, why did he say infrastructure was needed in 2019, but he now says it's not needed?
The question also included the proposition about 1.5 million people coming to Australia. I think that's what the Prime Minister is referring to in his answer, so I'm just going to ask him to continue.
I certainly am. They don't even read their own questions before they ask them, Mr Speaker, and he's in charge of their tactics.
Order. The Prime Minister will continue with his answer.
So, when it comes to infrastructure, indeed, we will be a nation-building infrastructure government.
The member for Wannon.
And one of the things that we've done is to have to reassess programs that weren't part of commitments that we made because of their incompetence when it comes to infrastructure. And we saw that in project after project, where projects that were worth hundreds of millions of dollars were promised with funding attached to them worth $50 million or $40 million, and no state agreement, no partnership agreement, no process to actually deliver them, because they were incompetent when it comes to infrastructure. And the best example of that, of course, is Inland Rail, where a project that began in single digits of billions of dollars of cost has now been costed at $31 billion.
The member for Riverina.
With literally being Inland Rail, because it doesn't go to a port anywhere. It doesn't go to Brisbane Port, didn't go to Gladstone Port, and didn't go to Melbourne Port. So they had a project riddled by incompetence. So we had to do a review of that, and these projects are important, but you've actually got to get it right. Got to get it right. And just as this bloke got Badgerys Creek concluded.
The Manager of Opposition Business. The Manager of Opposition Business. The Manager of Opposition Business will be warned if he continues to keep interjecting. All right. Oh, the member for Riverina is warned. He's had a good go. Order. I want to hear from the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. How will the Albanese Labor government's historic aged care investment make the industry better as a whole?
Give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
I thank the member for Hasluck for her question, and I know the member is passionate about aged care and about ensuring that older people in her electorate receive a higher standard of care thanks to the historic reforms that the Albanese Labor government is making. And I'm pleased to say that this Labor budget delivers $36 billion worth of funding for the aged care sector, a historic injection of funds into a much-needed sector, and we will give $11.3 billion to aged care workers to increase their pay 15% above the award from 1 July. And this money will change lives. It will ease cost of living pressures for staff. It will improve the care that some of our most vulnerable Australians receive. And because we are fully funding this pay rise, including the on-costs, it will help providers continue on the road of financial improvement after 9 years of being left to rot by the coalition. On top of the $11.3 billion worth of wages, we are delivering a total funding uplift, including indexation, of $14.1 billion in residential care. And this package includes the new AN-ACC price of $243.10 plus $10.80 hotelling supplement per resident per day, up from $216. This represents more than a 17% increase to annual funding compared to the Coalition's 1.7% increase to annual funding, which is what they left the sector with. They left the sector with a 1.7% indexation increase and then spent 12 months feigning great concern of thinly, recently applied veneer of concern about viability for the sector when it was the opposition who left them with a 1.7% indexation increase. That was so pitiful, we have had to add a correction in this budget to atone for their sins. And we are putting a 17% indexation increase in this budget to clean up their mess. Talk about the arsonists complaining about the price of water. They left the industry with 1.7%, spent 12 months feigning concern about the viability of the sector, and now we're sweeping in with a 17% increase, and they can't even lift their heads to listen to the good news. That's right. In 18 months after the Royal Commission handed down their final report into the neglect in the sector, the opposition addressed only 9 of 148 recommendations. We're 3 weeks out from our one-year anniversary, Mr Speaker, and in our 1 year in government, we will have addressed 69 of 148 recommendations. That is reforming aged care. That is taking care seriously. This side of the House is returning optimism to aged care. This side of the House is returning viability, confidence to the sector.
The call to the honourable member for Flinders.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Labor's budget provides no funding for new infrastructure investment in our capital cities. So what additional level of congestion does the government expect the extra 1.5 million people who will come to Australia over 5 years will cause?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Flinders for her question. And what we did when we were last in government, and that will be reflected when we, over our period in government as well, in addition to the commitments that we put into the budget, including, of course, in Victoria, the suburban rail loop, because a project that will make an enormous difference, in Victoria. What we didn't do is what happened after our period in office, where, compared with the rail funding under the Howard government, that's a really easy number to remember, zero, not a single dollar into public transport over 12 years. What we did was transform projects with rail projects like Regional Rail Link in Victoria. We actually had as well in Victoria the Melbourne Metro project. Now, the member would be aware of the Melbourne Metro project because it's the key to unclogging congestion in the network to enable the entire network across the city of Melbourne to be expanded. But we had $3 billion in the budget, and what happened, we even had a joint board with Commonwealth representatives. What happened when the Liberal Party came to office was they ripped that $3 billion out, pulled the Commonwealth from the board because they didn't believe in funding of projects like that. Nation-building projects. So they ripped the money out of that, and that led to a delay in that project, which of course is now funded thanks to the Andrews government, which is in its 3rd or 4th or 5th term. I've lost count. And then in Brisbane, of course, the Cross River Rail project that will be so important for the Olympics. Of course, there as well, we had $715 million in the budget, as well as an availability payment model of $2.4 billion. And again, they ripped the money out of the Cross River Rail, ripped it out of that project, said it wasn't good enough, and so because because Tony Abbott, when he was Prime Minister, didn't believe in funding public transport. That's the sort of loss that we saw. Now, what our government has done is not rip out fully funded projects. What we have done, though, is identify the range of projects that are underfunded and can't possibly ever be delivered, because it's dishonest to say, as they did for the Rockhampton Ring Road, that you can build a ring road for half of the money that it will actually cost for construction. And I won't go too far into Rockhampton because it gets him upset about Rockhampton and Yeppoon and Yeppen, as you will remember in the past.
Order. Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. The call to the honourable member for Lalor.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its commitment to get wages moving? How long has this been a policy of the Australian government?
Give a call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Lalor. And the member for Lalor might be surprised that 12 months ago the Australian government had a different policy. It has not always been the policy of the Australian government to get wages moving. In fact, in the whole history of the Wages Price Index, ever since the ABS first put it together, there have only been 9 quarters in its whole history where it fell below 2%. Every single one of those quarters had the same side of politics with its fingerprints on those quarters. Which side do you reckon? Every one of those 9 quarters had their fingerprints on them.
Order.
For those people who wanted to get wages moving, for those people who needed to get wages moving, what answer did those opposite provide? For low-paid workers trying to make ends meet, they provided no answer. To the underpaid workers in aged care, those opposite provided no answer. To workers stuck on 20-year-old work choices agreements, those opposite provided no answers. Now, we're familiar with leaders of the opposition providing no answers, like Tony Abbott managed it. He gave Mark Riley no answer for 28 seconds. They've managed no answer on wages for their entire political career. No answer on wages that entire time. And that silence has hurt households, has hurt the economy and has hurt the budget.
The member for Fisher.
The turnaround in the budget figures, as the Treasurer has made clear, 40% of what has changed is because of employment and wages outcomes that have changed since the government changed. Workers on the minimum wage needed a government that would back them, and we did. Aged care workers needed a government that would back them for a pay rise, and we did. Workers on those 20-year-old work choices agreements with no hint of improved conditions in sight needed a government that would cancel those agreements, and we did. Women needed a government that would ban pay secrecy clauses, and we did. Those who miss out on benefits, those who missed out on an enterprise bargaining system that was modern enough to actually deliver for them, needed a government that would change the bargaining rules, and we did. And when we did that, what was the gloom and doom from those opposite about the fear of wages going up? The member for Mallee said it was feeding the beast. The member for Nichols said it was a recipe for chaos and disruption. The member for Banks described it as grotesque. The member for Longman, I love this, said getting wages moving. He said that was pure socialism. And Michaelia Cash, Senator Cash, said it had closed down Australia.
Has concluded. I give the call to the order. The call to the honourable member for Lyne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Stuart from Louth Park, near my electorate, says the cost of living is the biggest thing on our minds right now. Stuart says his wife... the question is to the Prime Minister.
Okay.
Stuart from Louth Park says the cost of living is the biggest thing on our minds right now. Stuart says his wife had to go back to work sooner after the birth of their daughter because of the cost of everything. Why does this... Why does this budget do nothing structural to help Australians like Stuart and Samantha get ahead, and at the same time remove the low and middle income tax offset for them, where they would have been $1,500 better off each? And why has this government brought a budget?
The member's time has concluded. The order. The question was very broad in its nature regarding structural reform. I heard the question about the last part of the question ran out of time. So, look, to assist the House, I'm just going to ask the member for Lyne to state the question, who's it directed to from the beginning, and it'll be heard in silence.
Yeah.
Order.
Okay. Apologies, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Stuart from Louth Park says the cost of living is the biggest thing on our minds right now, and his wife had to go back to work earlier, soon after the birth of their daughter, because the cost of everything was going up. Why does this budget do nothing structural to help Australians like Stuart and Samantha get ahead, including losing the low and middle income tax offset, where they would have been $1,500 better off?
Give a call to the Prime Minister. Order.
I thank the member for his question, and with regard to the last element of his question regarding the Lamito, I hope that he tells Stuart that it was Josh Frydenberg as Treasurer who made the decision.
Order.
Who made
Order.
the decision.
The Leader of the Opposition,
made the decision.
Order.
The
Leader of the Opposition will cease objecting.
This is going to be the centrepiece of their response. Wow. Wow. Look, he asks about Stuart's partner going back to work. One of the things that we've done is put in place an extension of paid parental leave as well. That's why we've done this. Now, they were in office for 9 years. They could have done it during any of that period of time, but of course they didn't. They could also have supported, and I hope that the member for Lyne is honest enough to apologise to Stuart for voting against the energy price relief plan,
for leave the chamber under
the $3 billion of support. And I hope that you also tell Stuart of your opposition to other measures, including our cheaper childcare plan, so that I assume that their child will go into childcare if the husband and wife are both working. Well, from July 1, they will get cheaper childcare as a result of this government's position. Again, like everything else, opposed by those opposite. I hope as well that he tells Stuart about our cheaper medicines. He's probably already had benefit from it, along with so many Australians. But of course, the 6 million Australians that will benefit from what we have put forward. I assume, therefore, the member for Lyne is going to vote for that support as well. I hope that this means that the member for Lyne will vote for all of the cost of living measures which we have in this budget. And I hope that the member for Lyne counsels members of the coalition about their rhetoric that says that providing any support somehow is damaging the economy. You can't have it both ways. You can't say people are doing it tough but will vote against every single measure that is aimed at assisting them. But that's what his colleagues in the coalition are doing. I hope also that the member for Lyne says that it's a good thing that the member for Watson is the minister in charge of fixing our industrial relations system so that wages actually rise.
Give the call to the member for Bean.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. How has the Albanese Labor government developed policies that were funded in this week's budget?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Bean for his question. Indeed, in our first two budgets we delivered on the commitments that we took to the election. And these policies were carefully developed while we were in opposition, at a time when those opposite were racking up $1 trillion of debt providing $19 billion for companies that were actually increasing their profits, were deliberately keeping wages low, denying climate change, refusing to upgrade our energy grid, making cuts to Medicare, hollowing out TAFE, doing all of that. What we were doing was coming up with solutions. That's what good oppositions do, is they spend their time developing policies. And back when budget replies had policies, we developed a range of them that we announced on budget reply night. Cheaper childcare was the centrepiece of the first budget reply, but we also had our National Rail Manufacturing Plan to lead into the creation of the National Reconstruction Fund. We had our Rewiring the Nation program, our $20 billion program to upgrade the energy grid. We had the announcement of the creation of the Australian Centre for Disease Control. In our second budget reply, we had the Housing Australia Future Fund, still stuck in the Senate with the failure of the Coalition or the Greens political party to commit to support. But we hope that there's a change of heart from some of those on the crossbenches. We had our Start-up Year program to support start-up companies. We had new energy apprenticeships. In our third budget reply, we had health and aged care as a focus, strengthening Medicare, more carers with more time to care, putting nurses back into nursing homes, better food for residents, better pay for carers, and we've seen in Tuesday night's budget $11.3 billion. That's what we did. But the Leader of the Opposition, of course, has contrasted that with what occurred when he was a part of the government. He told Paul Kelly in The Australian the Liberals haven't had any policies since 2015. This is what he said. From the time Tony Abbott was deposed by Malcolm Turnbull, the Liberal Party hasn't stood for any substantive policy formulation. There was no major policy offering at the 2022 election. This guy wasn't a commentator, he was a cabinet minister during that entire period. And he concedes no policy since 2022. Well, of course, we shouldn't complain, because when he did come up with policies, we know it was a tax on GP visits, cost of seeing a GP raising by $7, raising the cost of prescriptions by $5, a triple threat to people's health care.
The member for Page will leave the chamber under 94A. He's warned. Give the call to the member for Mallee.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Mildura Fruit Juices Australia, in my electorate of Mallee, has had to reduce its intake of grapes this season as the energy cost to evaporate into grape concentrate is now unviable. The company's general manager has reported a $500,000 per year price hike in electricity this year. Why is Mildura Fruit Juices not enjoying the reduction in power prices the Prime Minister promised?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question, and I'll ask the Energy Minister to supplement here, because I haven't given myself any other portfolios. But I make this point. To the member about the company in her electorate in Mildura. She asked about the price of gas, but they came in here and voted against a cap on gas prices. Voted against it. Said that Armageddon. I quoted some of the things that were said by those opposite. If we dared to put a cap on gas prices, which we did, it was the right thing to do, and it had an impact. And in addition to that, the member voted against the $3 billion combined with the Victorian government, as long with other state and territory governments.
The Prime Minister will pause, and I will hear from the member for Mallee.
Speaker, it's a point of order on relevance. I was actually talking about electricity, not gas.
I'll just give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. They voted against the entire plan, which consisted of a cap on gas prices, a cap on coal prices implemented through the Liberal Party in the New South Wales government, and they voted against the $3 billion plan. I'd ask the Minister for Energy.
Order.
Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, $1,676 is the difference that this government has made to the average Victorian small business because of our intervention, reducing $1,676.
The member for Fairfax.
They voted for power price rises.
Fairfax will cease interjecting.
$1,600 higher than what they are, Mr Speaker. That's what the opposition, that's what the honourable member voted for. $1,676 higher increases.
The member for Fairfax,
just on Tuesday night, introduced tax treatment of investments for businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, to invest in more energy-efficient operations to reduce their power bills and reduce their emissions.
Order.
The opposition is probably against that as well, Mr Speaker. They hate tax cuts which are actually good for business and good for the climate, like our electric vehicle tax cut was, like the package that the government released on Tuesday night is, because we actually believe in supporting small business through difficult times. The opposition believes they're voting for higher power prices.
Give the call. Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. How will the Albanese Labor government's budget measures assist Australians' veteran community?
Give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Werriwa for her question and for her ongoing support for the over 1,500 veterans and families in her community. And I'd also like to congratulate the Treasurer on his budget this week, because there is no doubt that veterans are a key priority for the Albanese Labor government. And the Albanese government's budget measures are assisting veterans by dealing with the former government's underfunding and under-resourcing of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and that has had real-world consequences for our veterans. While the former coalition government was trumpeting their affection for the veteran community, they were undercutting their services and supports. The Albanese Labor government is investing in landmark measures to prioritise veterans and families for generations to come. We've now crunched the numbers, and I'm so proud that this budget sees that the Department of Veterans Affairs will be receiving more funding than it has in 3 decades. This week's budget will ensure veterans can better access services and supports that we're delivering on the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. One of our government's top priorities in this is eliminating the claims backlog under the last government. We've invested $233.9 million over 4 years in the October budget to employ 500 additional staff to process claims. That's already having great results. We're now seeing the backlog is now down 20% from its peak. But there's still more work to do. And in this budget, we're investing a further $64.1 million to maintain staffing levels to meet that demand, as well as $254.1 million to modernise and sustain ageing IT systems, systems that previous government left to degenerate. We know that families look different all over the country. For many kids, grandparents are their primary carers. So we're expanding the Defence, Veterans and Families Acute Support Package to make sure that grand carer veteran families are also supported if experiencing crisis. Veterans have also been concerned about not being able to access a GP. This budget delivers in making it easier to see a doctor by tripling the veteran access payment for GPs. In this budget, we're also supporting those who support our veterans with $2 million towards mental health awareness and suicide intervention training, and increasing the wages of the workers who provide in-home care to veterans and families. Australia's Defence Force personnel and veterans made a solemn commitment to serve and defend our nation. The Albanese government is getting on with the job of building stronger foundations of a better future for our veterans and families.
The call to the honourable member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Andrew Boak of Goldman Sachs says that Labor's budget is likely to impact on interest rates, and I quote, "The risks are skewed to more tightening being required and potentially as soon as next month's Reserve Bank board meeting." Why does this budget make inflation worse?
The Minister for Cybersecurity will see interjecting. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Barrow for his question, and I also take the opportunity to acknowledge the significant stance that he has taken, and I give my respect for the stance that he took on a personal
order.
Can I say on the question which goes to inflation and where the impact of the budget on it, of course, it occurs in a context of the Governor of the Reserve Bank saying on the 2nd of May, inflation in Australia has passed its peak. But if you look at, this will be a first, Mr Speaker, but I'll quote Terry McCrann. Terry McCrann had this to say: I don't see the budget as a serious threat to inflation. I certainly don't see the Reserve Bank reacting by raising interest rates. The Commonwealth Bank said this. The Commonwealth Bank says this: the move to surplus in 2022-23 represents a fiscal contraction that is helpful in moderating the inflation pulse running through the economy. Bill Evans, of course, said, I don't expect them to put upward pressure on interest rates in the near term. And that is what respected economic commentators have said. And that shouldn't be surprising, because when a government does what we did with the budget, which is to bank over the two budgets some 87% of revenue gains, compared with what the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison governments did of bank just 40%, or the Howard government just 30%, then that's what responsible fiscal policy looks like. That takes pressure off the area in which the honourable member has asked. But in addition to that, of course, unlike the anticipated deficit projected by those opposite, which was $78 billion, when they were in government and handed down their budget just a little over a year ago, that turnaround, that fiscal turnaround, the most serious fiscal turnaround in Australian history, from $78 billion deficit to turn that into a projected surplus of $4.2 billion. And this comes, of course, off the back of the highest CPI that we've seen this century, 2.1% in the March 2022 quarter, that saw vegetables rise 6.6, fruit 4.9, beef 7.6, tertiary education 6.3, fuel 11. That was the legacy that we inherited when he came into office. You created, the opposition created the mess, but we're busy fixing it.
Prime Minister's time has concluded. The call to the member for Macarthur.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. What new initiatives is the Albanese Labor government delivering that will grow advanced manufacturing in Australia?
The call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Macarthur. He is part of a government elected on a commitment to build a future made in Australia. Because manufacturing matters, it creates great firms, secure jobs and delivers the products that Australians need. But the manufacturing jobs of the future depend largely on the decisions we make today, and it's why we supported and stood up in the last weeks of March the National Reconstruction Fund, one of the largest investments in Australian manufacturing capability in living memory. And in this week's budget, we took the crucial next step, which was investing more than $500 million to lay the foundations for future economic growth in science and industry. And at its heart, we had an investment in the $392 million industry growth program, because we want to turn great ideas into strong businesses, especially if they support advanced manufacturing, growing businesses and jobs. And across the country, you see really great ideas at work. The member for Solomon, for example, showed me up in the Northern Territory, Speed 3D. They are the world's fastest 3D metal manufacturers, working across marine defence sectors. Very impressive outfit. In Camberwell in Queensland, Bulaguru, using First Nations knowledge of Spinifex grass to make medical gels used in the treatment of arthritis. SpeedX, who are recognised in the Prime Minister's Science and Innovation Awards, their world-leading diagnostic technology used to detect cancers and infectious diseases. So the Industry Growth Program will work with businesses like that to develop turn those great ideas and support them to grow and turn into something real, connecting them with a support network of experts, helping them find investors, or providing grant funding between $50,000 to $5 million to set them up for potential future support in the National Reconstruction Fund. So these are vital, tangible ways to help businesses where they need it, when they need it, and in the form that they need it. Part of our plan to support domestic manufacturing, to grow sovereign capability, and to continue to be a country that makes things. And the Albanese government is building a stronger foundation for the future, backing Australian manufacturing. Focusing on growth was a key pillar of the budget, and this isn't just about the $392 million that will be investing in innovators and new firms. It's not just about the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund. We're backing our people. We are backing their know-how. We want them to build new businesses and new jobs. The money's important, but so is the signal that we're sending to industry, that there is a future for them here, that the government will back them, and that the budget proves that we will do just that.
Give a call to the member for McPherson.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Pinpoint Macroeconomics, Chief Economist Michael Blythe said of Labor's budget, and I quote, "Unfortunately, proposed fiscal settings look a little confused. Policymakers cannot claim that fiscal measures are both stimulatory for households and non-inflationary. Why does this budget make inflation worse?"
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Moncrieff McPherson for the question, and I acknowledge her service to this House and as a minister in the former government and as someone who has announced her retirement. I wish her sincerely very well in her future, and I do that publicly as I have privately. To the member, what we have done is put together a responsible budget, a budget that delivers $14.6 billion of cost of living relief, assisting people who need that support with modest increases in JobSeeker, in rental assistance, the changes that we've made in parenting payment that will make a difference to people's lives who are doing it tough. But we've also done measures such as our energy price relief plan, which, when determining that in partnership with states and territories, instead of doing a cash splash and handing out cheques, as has occurred at various times in the past, what we did was come up with a design that deliberately put downward pressure on inflation. And that's why Treasury have found that that measure, together with the gas and coal caps, will reduce inflation by 0.75%. So we were responsible. Our fee-free TAFE will mean relief whilst addressing the supply chain constraints that have been identified by the Reserve Bank Governor as the major cause, along with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, on the inflationary pressures in our economy but also in the global economy. So we have put together a budget that's responsible. But we also, in the budget, didn't just have expenditure, we had savings as well. Across this budget and the last budget, we had $40 billion of savings. That's hard work of the Expenditure Review Committee to go through line by line to make sure that we're delivering for the Australian people. And that's the context of the changes that we made, on top of us putting 87% across the two budgets of any revenue gains towards the bottom line. And of course, that means lower debt repayments in the future. Lower debt repayments in the future that are so important. And it contrasts with the last budget of the former government that splashed money everywhere. It all ended just as soon as the election was over, but we've dealt with that. We didn't create the mess, but we're fixing it.
Mrs. Times included. Give the call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government continuing to build on Medicare and the PBS? How has the government's approach been consistent with the public debate about the development of Medicare and the PBS since their inception?
The call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Reid for her question. She is an outstanding part of this extraordinary generation of new talent that were elected to the Labor caucus at last year's election. Mr Speaker, one of the constant themes of post-war politics, one of the enduring differences between our side of politics and that side of politics, Mr Speaker, is on the question of universal health coverage. The ability to obtain an essential medicine or to see a doctor, no matter your means, no matter your circumstances in life. Back when Ben Chifley initiated the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme back in the 1940s, the Liberal Party said no. Back when Gough Whitlam initiated the Medibank system in the 1970s, the Liberal Party said no, and they then abolished it. And when Bob Hawke initiated Medicare in the 1980s, you guessed it, the Liberal Party said no, time and time again. The godfather of the modern Liberal Party, John Howard, described Medicare as a total disaster, as a nightmare, as the greatest failure of the Hawke government. He actually described bulk billing as an absolute rort. An absolute rot. And while they finally raised the white flag on Medicare in the 90s, Mr Speaker, they have always viewed it as a basic safety net rather than a system of universal coverage. Echoing John Howard's description of bulk billing as an absolute rot, the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Health Minister, said, and I quote, "There are too many free Medicare services." Too many free Medicare services. Well, this side could not be more different, Mr Speaker. Labor's commitment to Medicare and to the PBS has never wavered. It's always been unshakable, and you see it in Tuesday's night's budget delivered by the Treasurer, a $6 billion investment in strengthening Medicare and our next chapter in our commitment to cheaper medicines for 6 million Australians living with chronic disease. After 6 years, Mr Speaker, of a Medicare rebate freeze initiated by the Leader of the Opposition, you see it in the biggest increase to the Medicare rebate in 30 years since Prime Minister Paul Keating was still in office. And after all of the declines we've seen in bulk billing, you see it in the centrepiece of the budget, a $3.5 billion investment in tripling the bulk billing incentive, a game-changer for mums and dads, a game-changer for pensioners and concession card holders who rely on bulk-billed doctors' service. That's the difference, Mr Speaker, between them and us. John Howard described bulk billing as absolute rot. The Leader of the Opposition said there were too many free Medicare services. Well, for Labor, bulk billing is the beating heart of Medicare, and that's why it was the centrepiece of Tuesday night's budget.
Give the call to the Prime Minister. Order.
Mr Speaker, we tried to help the member for Banks. We really did. We hung in there. If he was next, we wouldn't have done this, Mr Speaker. But I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Order.